Most of us cringe to think about how much negativity lies in wait this election year. Yet you're about to meet a remarkable woman who says, I don't think you've lived until you've had almost $1 million in negative advertising thrown at you. Imagine that. It's exactly what happened to her.
For years, Bunni Pounds was a political consultant who worked with members of Congress running their campaigns. She ran for Congress herself in 2018, becoming the only candidate in the nation endorsed by Vice President Mike Pence. Although she came up slightly short in her run for office, God has still been using Bunni. With 20 years of Christian ministry and long-time political experience, she is educating and empowering believers about politics and government. With her nationwide ministry, Christians Engaged. In her book, Jesus in Politics, Bunni shares her journey in a mudslinging profession, as well as the importance of Christians' involvement in our nation.
Please welcome to the 700 Club, Bunni Pounds. Bunni, how nice to have you here.
Oh, it's so great to be with you, Terry. Such a dream.
How great to talk after the piece that we just saw. Here you were, you have a dream to become a missionary, probably in your heart to some foreign nation. God calls you to America and eventually into politics. How does one go from missionary to politics?
I think the Lord wanted me to suffer. No.
No, I'm right there with you.
It's a really hard career path that a lot of people don't really understand, but there are places for believers in government and politics. And frankly, Terry, we all need to be engaging. Every American Christian needs to be praying, voting regularly, and engaging in our city, our state, and our nation. And I want to inspire young people to see themselves as Christ followers, walking in the presence of God, going into these places of influence, because we can truly make a difference.
And these places of persecution. I mean, in an election year like this, one of the things I hate about watching TV of any kind is those ads that come up and are so mudslinging in every way. You know that they can't all be true. And so where did that happen to you? What happened to you as you were entering this arena?
So I spent 10 years working for members of Congress, running campaigns. So when I ran for Congress in 2018, I knew what I was getting into, eyes wide open, right? But it is different when it's your family and your livelihood that's being affected. And you know, it took a while. I lost that race with just 2,700 votes out of 43,000. It was a Republican runoff. But it took recovery time. Yes. I mean, I never had failed before. I had never had that kind of dramatic thing happen to me. And it is difficult. And what people need to understand is when people are putting themselves on the front lines of the battle, running for office, we need to be praying for them, holding their hands, and walking beside our brothers and sisters that are doing that.
So what did God teach you in the midst of that? Because I know you went through a time of, how can somebody not feel bitterness when they're attacked like you get attacked on the battlefield of politics? What did God teach you through that, Bunni?
Well, part of my motivation for writing this book is to help people have a lens that they need to get involved in politics and government as believers. But secondly, those of us that are involved, we need to be watching our souls and our hearts. Anger hits us, pride hits us, fear hits us, offenses, bitterness, and unforgiveness. And for me, my opponent had floated all of his runoff. His consultants had floated all his invoices. And so I ended up the campaign having outraised him by $300,000. And he had floated $260,000 of invoices. Wow. And so the injustice of that on the back end hit my heart, right? Like, this is wrong. It was legal, but felt injustice.
Yes.
And so a year later, the Lord told me, he said, you have to get over this, and the only way you're going to move forward is to do something that would impact your own soul. So I went to my opponent and asked him if I could help pay off the rest of his debt from the runoff, and we raised him about $40,000 and celebrated him and laid all of our unforgiveness at the feet of Jesus.
You will probably never know the ramifications of all of that broadly speaking. But talk a little bit about the fact that, you know, Christians have strong feelings about elections. We've just talked about potential division in the church. Yeah. But what do we need to do? I mean, you say in your book that you found along the way that Christians were pretty uninformed about things.
Apathetic, yeah, just completely apathetic. You know, half of the body of Christ, whether they call themselves Protestants or Catholics, are still not voting, and we're definitely not voting in primaries or local elections. So we created Christians Engage, our ministry, to help Christians pray, talk to God about what's happening in the news, talk to God about your city, state, nation. Yeah. Sending them voting reminders around every election in the country so they get a simple guide to print off their ballot, research their ballot, and then teaching them about basic civics. We have civic classes, we have biblical worldview classes, because if we just get a little bit of knowledge, Terry, if we overcome our fear of making a mistake, which is a lot of times what people are doing, then we can really move forward and be the leaders we're called to be. Can you imagine if the entire body of Christ started voting in every election and voting biblical values and discerning what God had them to do?
And you know, Bunny, it's not just fear. I have grown children, and often my kids will say to me, why are we doing this? Our vote doesn't really count. What do you say to people who?
It's a lie. It's a lie. There was just a few months ago, a city councilman lost his race. I think it was in New York State by 1 vote.
Oh my.
Well, he forgot to vote. He didn't vote for himself. Can you imagine? So there are races that happen all the time that are won or lost by 10 votes, 100 votes. But even if you're really concerned about the presidential election, you don't know what to do, I want to remind people that the president is going to put in everybody in the executive branch, right? So we have to make those choices based on platforms, not based on personalities. But then remember, there are local candidates and state candidates on that ballot. Yeah. And we need to be showing up and researching that, and a Christian can do that in 30 minutes. Yeah. Research their ballot and go and make decisions.
Your organization, Christians Engaged, had trouble getting a tax-exempt status. Tell us about that.
Yeah, 18 months into our ministry, all we were doing was teaching on prayer, voting, and engagement, not endorsing candidates or political parties. And we got a letter from the Internal Revenue Service saying that we're denying your tax-exempt status, and get this is all in quotes, because Bible teachings are typically affiliated with the Republican Party and candidates.
Wow.
Can you imagine? And then they went on to say, because
if I was a Democrat, that would offend me.
Yeah, right. And so they went on to say, because you're teaching on the sanctity of human life, biblical justice, debt and taxation, Israel, these things are inherently Republican, and therefore you're not nonpartisan. Well, that decision would have affected every church and ministry in America. And I talk about in my book in chapter 8 is called The Boldness of Joan of Arc, because courage and boldness is not in a vacuum. Yes. We step out, and our board decided to take that on with our friends at First Liberty Institute, and we won that case in 21 days, and thank God.
We're in an election year. There's going to be a lot going on between now and this coming November. What is the bottom line word you would give to believers?
We have to stand on the wall like Nehemiah went into Jerusalem, right? In 52 days. Can you imagine going into Jerusalem and mobilizing the people to rebuild a wall in 52 days? That's what he did, before cell phones and before text messages.
Imagine.
And he told the people, put yourself on your section of the wall. Take your family and community. Don't look at the whole big problem. Don't look at all the big wall. Because if we do that, all the voices that want to keep us in apathy and complacency, but focus on what you can do. So I know we're focused on the presidential election this year. We should be. But we also need to look at our school boards, our local city councils, our Chamber of Commerce, our Rotary clubs, our homeowners associations. Where can we be leaders in this country and take the gospel into those places of influence?
Wow. I want to say Bunny's book is called Jesus in Politics, One Woman's Walk with God in a Mudslinging Profession. It is available nationwide. Get engaged, people. Get engaged. Bunny, thank you.
Oh, thank you,
Terry.
Terry.
Great to have you here.